Chapter 5 Rudra Madhavi. Doted on everybody's heart in the village, child Rudra was growing like waxing moon and was turning into the most attractive youth, inexorable to all maidens' eyes, who often spoke of the light brown glassy tint of his eyes, as if that were of immense importance. From them came a genuine intensity, honesty, and gentleness. He was taller than any other man of his age in the village. His strong, hefty arms were capable of accomplishing even the toughest task. He was mostly found carrying extraordinary loads on his bare, broad shoulders. Sometimes it was an immense trunk of a teak tree for the old cart maker, and sometimes 2 or 3 barrels of water for the ladies striving to carry water from the river. He was well-built, muscular, with an almost perfectly symmetrical body and a little dusky complexion, but the most charming face. Perhaps this is what it meant by a gentleman, immeasurably striking yet so naive. Headless to his reckoning fame, he was completely immersed in his own world of family and friends. He would help his aging parents most of the time in picking herbs and making medicines from the leaves, barks, and roots, assembling herds of cows from meadows, planting and nurturing their domestic garden, and reading Vedas as a daily regime. And as always, in his spare time, he still loved to play his all-time favorite stone game with his same childhood gang, always unfavorably ascribed with the same task of chasing the ball. And so was happening the day when howling of Rudra's name was whirling around in every corner of Kaverivan. Go, run and chase it, fast, Rudra, before Chandan could top up all stones. Rudra would run, climb, jump, and with a feral leap would catch the ball to toss it back. He almost looked as if floating in the air in the attempt of furnishing the said tasks, leaving no chance of complaint for his teammates. Chandan, you got to save our team. Do your best to throw so hard this time that Rudra should take a lot of time to find it. Enough for us to recastle the entire stack. We need to stay focused on our goals with an absolute mindfulness. Go for it. Go for your hit now. Madhav urged Chandan against Rudra's dexterity with an authoritative command of a true captain. And so went Chandan, stepping forward on just an apt position with the ball caged in his crooked fingers, and then unwaveringly thocked the ball right through the piles of stones. And off it moved further and further. Rudra ran stormily after the ball. He was scarcely a few steps away from it. Therewith, from nowhere, he heard a brisk chanting of eternal mantras. Out of curiosity, he moved a little more further, ignoring the ball, and then kept moving until the chant was clear enough to his earshot. He peeped through the bushes to find about the existence of being behind it, but could hardly see anything except few shadows falling on the slopes of the rocks. So, in order to take a closer look, he carefully climbed on a tree along its dense leafy branches and stood on a high forked bough, leaning forward to catch a proper view. At first glance, to his bewilderment, all he could see was a bright yellow silk hanging, held by 2 elite damsels, stretching it tight from the edges to form a curtain-like casing. What are they hiding? It seems as if the yellow petals were protecting the most delicate flower inside, thought Rudra. He was now unable to resist his inquisitiveness to find what's behind it, for he had never known something like this ever before. So he climbed higher and settled on a huge, thick branch. As soon as he caught the clear glimpse of activities behind the curtain, froze momentarily, only with a feel of freakish commotion in the left part of his broad chest. his eyes fixated upon the brightest feminine figure of a godly woman he had never even imagined to exist on the earth. A sleek white satin piece of cloth draped on her attractive, delicate body as she stood rooted on the altitude of a rugged rock with closed eyes, joined hands, and plicated lips that were chanting incessantly under the mildest waterfall of Kaveri River. Rudra thought she was some heavenly ethereal from all above the clouds. Who is she? Echoed Rudra's mind, whereas his heart was still pounding uncontrollably. After a while, as the lady walked out of the waterfall, the bright yellow silk curtain glowing in the bright sun and circled around to cover her completely from all the spheres and drew back after some time, only to let her out all dressed and done. She looked like a princess with a soulful beauty, encircling with ecclesiastical aura, wearing multi-layer neckpiece on bright red, golden-bordered fine silk sari. Her hair was finely interwoven and decorated with jasmine flowers. She proceeded down the elevation on an expensive platform towards the group of priests who were sitting in a circle and reciting mantras, and then descended gently on her designated position. She followed the instructions and directions given by the priests to complete the rituals duly performed for some particular ceremony. Rudra stared without a blink, perplexed yet bewitched by the golden beauty. After all rites and formalities, she darted into a palanquin with a bearer ahead and another behind. Rudra felt helpless looking at the leaving troop. His unbridled passion and adoration, fueled with impulsive instincts, persuaded him to follow the women of magical beauty. He walked and walked after the palanquin by the river Kaveri till its extreme south edges, from where they turned right towards the city, and crossing the broad pathways through markets and temple sides, reached the palace of Surishila. The gigantic copper-sheeted weighty metal gates opened and closed behind the coaches and bearers sinking inside. Rudra stood out stupefied. He thought nothing else than meeting the beauty of virtues at least once to know more of her. Was it merely a coincidence for Rudra to have reached the palace of Surishila, or destiny had tossed over a cliffhanger for the impending events to transpire in Rudra's upcoming years? After a while, as the worn-out day quietly descended into a cozy lap of nature, the last sun rays costed behind soft steely clouds, blending the greens and purples, steadily melting into grey under the blooming moonlight. Rudra thought to locate a way into the palace. Squeezing through the narrow breaks in the hedge of the outer boundary, he reached near the high walls of the building where it was dark and silent. He managed to climb across the enclosing walls of the imperial palace and jumped into a veranda that was dimly lit up by the bouncing lights of flickering flames and settled firmly in the corners of the walls. Rudra looked around from the balcony, standing in his furthermost wonderment for the palace, which was far greater, huger, and wider than even a town he had ever seen before. To his amazement, the one dark, lonely passage was now glowing, its edges alive with iridescent sparks of light. The huge gardens, bezuddled with waterfall-sized fountains adorned with the varicolored flower beds, spread their grandeur all around the buildings, lined aside with thick, healthy trees laden with large, sweet-smelling blossoms overflowing their sweet nectar on long-spun pointy blades of grass. There were endless roofs, grand terraces, and uncountable windows studded like precious gems on intricately carved walls of palace. He closed his eyes and drew in a lungful of moistened air dipped in a sandy fume. In his quiet contemplation, he could now vision the pretty face of his lady clearer and closer. As he drew more closer, he abruptly opened his eyes in his sheer realization that at that moment what was more essential was to continue the search he had come for. Professedly, that seemed even more challenging now in that colossal palace, as he stood bemused before an enormous doorway roofed with a massive neat silk hanging, large enough to cover a whole city. But he proceeded ahead, efficiently now, somehow determined to follow his instincts to cross the 3 successional corridors first, and then take a steep right to turn towards an arched porch and finally to reach before a gate carved with bright, colorful embedded carving of dancing women in the center of flower vines, intricately shaped and painted as if they were real. From the room was coming the sound of giggling and tittering of the young damsels, which little by little seemed to close down the door as he opened it slightly and slowly slipped inside. Ladies were so busy in their amusing banter that the very occurrence did not catch their attention at all. Rudra instantly slid behind the curtains and slithered toward the backside window in order to trying to see through the faint white silk drap. Then he landed noiselessly in the balcony and peeked through to catch the proper sight. The royal chamber was like a mini palace itself, brilliantly illuminated with lanterns and scented candles. Jewel chests were cast around on royal tables, and right in the center was lying a stately bed on which lay the mysterious princess, resting her head on soft cottony pillows with arms spread out on soft and glossy cushions, looking as pretty as a daffodil resting amidst the pale yellow petals. Rudra's lungs were inflating and deflating with sweet scented air. His eyes relaxed at the pretty scene, fixated on the most charming face, as he quietly settled on window's sill a little ahead expanse of the large balcony. Apparently, he seemed satisfied to ultimately glimpse the godly woman of his faint vision with far lesser distance. His relaxed mind had halted to forget how much he had yearned to know more about her till the final leg of his excursion, as he paid no heed to continuous chatting of the girl sitting beside the royal beauty. As his body calmed and eased on resting after a long moil, the lids of his blotted eyes became heavy and closed down momentarily. After a little while before he could fall slumbering in his deepest dreams, he felt something sharp pinching in his chest, quite similar to the pinch given by his friend Chandan to wake him up from the sleep as a morning call. However, it felt a sharper one. He suddenly woke up nodding like an uneasy horse, and then looked narrowing his eyes at the figure standing right in his front with a sword gripping tight and straight and pointing to his chest. "Who are you, and what in the world are you up to slipping on my window?" asked the fearless soldier-like princess. Rudra remained quiet at the instant and kept looking amorously at her graceful face, which made the lady feel rather more discomfited. Hence, she called out loudly for guards in an abrupt, muddled tone. Perhaps her stumbling on words hastily was an upshot of Rudra's innocuous presence with his just right aura. She moved back, looked around, sneaking for soldiers if they had heard her call and were coming. But, to her shock, as she looked back again, there was no trace of Rudra, who had evaporated like a wisp of vapor. The guards immediately thronged over looking for him. Howbeit, Rudra was slipping down the same course of the way he had come from. As he proceeded to climb over the outer boundary, his swift-moving feet stumbled, gliding backwards again. Someone caught him tight from behind, pushed him down on his face on the ground, and instantly started to inquire in a baritone. A thief would not have left empty-handed. So I give you the chance to explain before splitting you apart. Tell me, who are you? Rudra firmly untangled the heavy arms strapped around his neck and came in front and stood dignifiedly face to face with the man. I am Rudraksha, son of Vaidya Sushotra from Kaverivan. I have come here after the princess, pronounced Rudra valiantly. I mean no harm to anyone, but her divine grace has dragged me here. Rudra's random word revealed his inmost sentiments for the princess. What princess do you speak of? Asked the man aggressively. I am talking about the magnificent countess whom I first discerned near the waterfalls of river Kaveri, performing some rituals. Some traditions maybe, said Rudra in verified notions. I'm sorry, but I could not hold myself to know more of her, thus followed her till here. Rudra revealed his naive intents truthfully. There was certainly a spark on his face that spared the man from taking any further action against him. His eyes were deep and defiant. Then you should rather cleanse your own soul under the same heavenly waterfall for having fallen for a wedded woman, that too of royalty, replied the man in a hostile and a bitter voice. Wedded woman? Rudra mumbled. Our pious and precious Princess Madhavi, the righteous wife of Prince Rohan, the rightful son of King Vajraveer, stated the man further, looking at Rudra unpleasantly. His affirmed disclosure pierced right through the Rudra's heart and ripped it apart in thousands of sniveling pieces. He felt weak like a wounded fawn, forsaking all his hopes in despair. But then, he had to gather his courage and apologize for his negligence and immature demeanor. If you wish to punish me for my mean deportment, put me down to the deserving sacrament, Rudra said to the man and stood assured of his words. His audacious personality imprinted straight on the man's agility that unquestionably had an eye for the truth, justice, and valor. You sure have some kind of substance, my boy. The heart of a lion and soul of an angel. Perhaps it's not yours, but the fault of your mischievous youth. Come with me. The man held Rudra's hand resolutely and took him away from the palace. They stopped in front of a well-designed house, which the man informed belonged to him, and entered the house. My name is Vishnukarma, and I am the Prime Minister to the royal court, serving the king as his wise man, an advisor, an administrator, and also am an old friend. Your splendid personality bounds me to keep empathy with you and let you go back to your abode, whilst your unconditional concern for the princess persuades me to tell you her story instead, in spite of the fact that neither you nor I can do anything to help her out of what is she going through in this course of time. Rudra spoke nothing but frowned at the words that mentioned what is she going through. Vishnukarma dwelled into his eyes as if he could read his curiosity. Adversity favors no one. If it has to befall, it will. But there is always a sunrise after a dark night. All we have to keep is hope. A single ray of hope is capable enough of overshadowing all the miseries. Vishnukarma heaved a deep sigh and paused for a while before beginning the story. whereas Rudra sat beside him in great astonishment, with eyes wide open and lips pressed taut, as his heart sank deeper and deeper. He was perhaps in a great tumult of what had just happened, along with what he was going to hear now.